The wind moved like a whisper through the skeletal trees lining the main street of Aben, Kansas, scattering a veil of frost across the weathered boards and broken crates that stood like silent sentinels against the cold. Dawn had barely brushed the sky with light, and the air hung heavy with the scent of smoke from chimney stacks. Mingling with the sharp, biting chill of an unforgiving winter, somewhere, a distant hoarse whineta sound trembling through the cold stillness like a fragile prayer. In that fragile morning, a story began. Etched in quiet desperation and whispered hope, Clara May Harper stood just beyond the town square, the snow crunching softly beneath her worn boots. Her eyes, though unseeing, caught the faintest impression of the world's shadows melting into shadow. Shapes folding into shapes, but mostly she felt the cold. The winter's breath was sharp against her cheeks, and she tucked her chin deeper into the frayed shawl draped over her narrow shoulders. The absence of sight had folded her world into something smaller, quieter, yet it was never empty. She listened, the murmur of townsfolk stirring, the scrape of a wooden cart, the harsh bark of old Jed's voice carrying over the frozen ground. The auction platform, a crude assembly of wagon planks and empty beer crates, stood in the center of the square like a lonely island amid the biting wind. Men clustered around to tranche hands with sun-scarred faces, drifters with tired eyes, the lawless and the lost. Their voices were coarse and low, wrapping around Clara like a suffocating shroud. She felt their gazes not the kind that see the soul, but the kind that measure worth. Currency far colder than any winter wind. Old Yet's rasping voice cut through the murmur like a rusted blade. Here's a fine bargain, boys. Blind as a bat, but young and strong enough to work. You won't find a sweeter deal for $1. His eyes flickered to Clara, a momentary hesitation buried beneath years of cynicism and survival. Clara's heart beat too loud in her chest, a frantic tattoo against ribs already bruised by rejection. She did not understand the weight of the coin tossed carelessly into old Jed's rough palm, nor the whispered deals struck in shadows. All she knew was the cold clutch of loneliness, the sharp sting of being sold, not a person, but a price. A burden to be cast off. Her breath rose in thin clouds, each exhale a fragile defiance. The murmurs thickened with laughter, rough and unforgiving.
What use is a girl who can't see?
A grizzled man spat, his voice spiked with contempt. Another sneered. Might as well be dead to us. Yet beneath the cold jeers and the trading of her fate like cattle, Clara held a secret strength, a small ember of resilience, kindled by years of survival in a world that had never paused to offer kindness. It was this quiet fire that kept her rooted when the town's judgment threatened to tear her apart. Wyatt Boone watched from the shadows beyond the crowd, a figure carved from the winter gloom itself, his broad shoulders hunched against the chill, a weather-beaten hat pulled low to shield his eyes. He had come to Aben with a past stitched together by loss and silence, carrying his own scars like a cloak. Yet something in the girl's stillness stirred a softness long buried beneath the layers of dust and grit. Without a word, Wyatt stepped forward, the scrape of his boots against the frozen earth barely a whisper. The crowd's chatter faltered as his steady gaze met Clara's. The cold seemed to hesitate, held at bay by the warmth in his eyes. He knelt beside her, reaching out a calloused hand that spoke louder than any promise. Clara's fingers curled around his palm, tentative at first, then firmer as the weight of isolation lifted. Replaced by something fragile yet profound, trust. Won't let them have you, Wyatt murmured, voice low like the hush of falling snow. The crowd parted as he rose, silence hanging thick in the frosty air. Clara's breath slowed, her heartbeat finding a steady rhythm beneath the touch of this quiet cowboy who had spoken not with words, but with the unspoken language of presence and protection. As they turned away from the auction's cold stage, the first weak rays of sunlight broke through the winter gray, casting long shadows that stretched across the frozen ground like the promise of a new dawn. Clara's fingers tightened around Wyatt's, a silent vow that beneath the winter's harsh embrace, a seed of hope had taken root, and in the soft fall of snowflakes, drifting like whispered prayers through the chilled air, A story of redemption and quiet courage began to unfold, one that would ripple through the town's cold heart. Unspoken yet undeniable, the world outside still held its judgment. But here, in the space between two hands entwined, something sacred had begun. Something that would not be sold or broken, no matter the price. And so, under a sky heavy with winter's breath, Clara May Harper stepped forward, not as a girl sold for $1, but as a soul quietly reclaimed, with Wyatt Boone's steady presence beside her. The journey away from rejection had begun. The snow whispered beneath their feet, telling a tale of resilience and gentle grace. The cold might linger, but within the silence, a new kind of warmth was growing, slow, patient, and fierce enough to burn through even the darkest winter. And the story was far from over. The landscape unfolded before them in a vast expanse of muted whites and grays, where the frozen earth met an endless sky bruised by heavy clouds. Each breath Clara May drew was a crystal shard against her lungs, sharp and biting. Yet, beneath the winter's relentless chill, a quiet transformation was taking root. Wyatt Boone rode beside her, the rhythmic crunch of hooves on hardened snow a steady pulse that tethered them both to the present. To the fragile thread of hope they now shared, Clara's world, once confined to darkness, began to stretch outward through the warmth of Wyatt's hands and the soft murmur of his voice. He guided her with a tenderness that needed no words, tracing familiar shapes in the air, translating the wild silence into something she could grasp. In the delicate clasp of his fingers, she found the courage to move forward, to trust in a future no longer dictated by the sharp edge of rejection. The journey was arduous siege, a test of endurance against biting winds and drifting snow that threatened to erase the footprints they left behind. Yet within this hardship lay a quiet beauty. The way Wyatt's shadow fell protectively over Clara, how his breath mingled with hers in the cold air, the way their silences spoke of shared understanding. There was no rush to mend what had been broken, only a patient weaving together of two fractured souls. Behind them, the town of Abin simmered with whispers, a cauldron of suspicion and scorn. Maggie Flynn's bar was a crucible of gossip, sharp tongue weaving tales that painted Clara as a burden and Wyatt as a fool chasing ghosts. Sheriff Amos Granger's wary eyes followed the cowboy's trail, doubts etched deep in his furrowed brow. In the harsh judgment of the townsfolk, Clara remained an outcast, her absence stirring both pity and disdain. But far from the biting cold of gossip and isolation, the quiet acts of grace between Clara and Wyatt began to shape a new kind of strength. It was in the soft brush of Wyatt's hand as he adjusted the scarf around her neck, the way Clara's fingers lingered on the worn leather of his saddle, the unspoken promise in a shared glance beneath a sky heavy with snow. Their connection blossomed in the spaces between words. Slow and deliberate, a testament to resilience forged not in grand declarations, but in the smallest gestures of care. One evening, as a storm gathered like a silent thread on the horizon, the wind howled through the skeletal branches, and snow fell thick and fast, turning the world into a swirling white tempest. They sought refuge beneath the twisted arms of an ancient oak, its gnarled roots sheltering them from the worst of the storm. The cold seeped into their bones, but in the cramped, trembling space, Clara felt the steady beat of Wyatt's heart against her own. It was a rhythm of survival and unspoken promise. The tempest outside was relentless, yet within the fragile cocoon of that moment, something fierce and unyielding was born. Wyatt's steady hand brushed a stray lock of hair from Clara's face, his touch a lifeline in the storm's chaos. She leaned into the warmth, her blind eyes closed, not in despair but in a dawning trust that no longer feared the darkness. When the storm finally abated, the world emerged reborn, glistening beneath a pale winter sun. Their journey back toward Abin was marked by a new resolve, an unspoken understanding that had woven them together through hardship and hope. Clara's steps grew surer, buoyed by the strength she had found not in sight, but in the quiet love that had blossomed from shared adversity. Returning to town was not a return to the same world. The harsh whispers had softened into tentative glances, the scorn giving way to a grudging respect. Sheriff Granger's eyes lingered longer, no longer dismissive but watchful,
Ow.
while Maggie Flynn's sharp smile lost its edge, replaced by a grudging nod of acknowledgement. Clara was no longer the girl sold for $1, but a woman forged in winter's embrace, resilient, dignified, and quietly unbreakable. And Wyatt Boone, once a shadow in the crowd, stood beside her like a sentinel, his silence now a language of devotion. Their story was no longer whispered in judgment, but spoken in the spaces between hearts, a testament to the power of gentle courage and enduring grace. As the sun dipped low, casting long golden fingers across the snow-dusted streets, the old soul who had witnessed this tale spoke softly to those who would listen. In the coldest winters, beneath the harshest skies, it is not the loudest voices that carry us through, but the quiet hands that hold us steady. Remember this: kindness and resilience are the warm fires that keep the soul alive when the world turns its back. If this story touched a place within you, if the quiet courage of Clara and Wyatt stirred your heart, then walk with us still. Subscribe and share these tales that whisper of hope, of grace found in unexpected places, and the unspoken love that changes everything.